Hey there, I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. What would it be like to be a mechanical designer? Somebody who technically designs products from scratch with an aim on mass production. Well, I've got you covered. I've got this great guest lined up. He has worked for some of the biggest outdoor and sports brands in the world, like Puma, Black Diamond, and a bunch of others. And not only that, he's personally worked with celebrated athletes like Tiger Woods, Vijay Singh, and Usain Bolt, to name a few. On this episode, we dive into this world of mechanical design. And the cool thing here is, listeners who have been keeping track and following along with the program will probably notice that we actually had an industrial designer on, and these two professions work very closely. And not only that, this guest, this mechanical designer, if you're keeping up with me here, is brothers with the industrial designer that I just had on the week before. So we kind of get into that a little bit too, the dynamic of those two, how they work together. Not only that, there's this really cool story involving Vijay Singh, the pro golfer. At one point, he was number one in the world. And my guest today has this really fun story involving him. So you want to catch that. So whether you're into engineering or not, whether you're into product design or not, that is fine. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Anyways, tons of interesting stuff. So let me more formally introduce you to him and we'll get into it. Rob Horacek is one of the co-founders and the technical lead at Anamaly, an award-winning, industry-disrupting product design firm. His prowess within product design stems from an education in mechanical engineering at Boston University and Dresden University of Technology in Germany. Further, his many years of experience working with internal R&D teams at major brands and time spent along entrepreneurs and startup companies, leading them through the product creation process, have provided him with much insight, knowledge, and awareness as per consumer design needs. Now, his specialties are wide and varied, including, but not limited to, advanced engineering analysis, rapid prototyping and 3D printing, as well as 3D CAD and design for manufacturing. Rob has a ton of experience in producing all types of consumer products. However, much of his work within Anamaly is centered on athletic innovation and wearable technology. Whether designing extreme sports equipment for top brands, including Puma, or for celebrated athletes, the quality of his craftsmanship has amounted to much buzz and plenty of accolades. His product designs have produced multiple awards over the past decade from widely respected organizations, publications, and design thinking firms, not limited to, get ready for this, Backpacker Magazine, Outside Magazine, Red Dot Design Award, that's a biggie, Popular Science, and of course several others. Not only that, many of his creations have been worn by the likes of professional golfers like Vijay Singh, footballers, Olympic sprinters like Usain Bolt, World Cup skiers, as well as public figures including Rihanna and Michelle Obama. So with all that stated, here's my conversation with Rob Horacek. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome to the program. Hey, how are you doing?
Good. Thanks so much. Great. How are you doing?
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, really looking forward to this talk. For listeners who are just tuning in right now too, what's interesting about this conversation, let me set it up here, is that I had Rob's brother Ray on recently, who is an industrial designer. So I think the pairing of the two of you guys, I think is going to make for a really sort of compelling look at what you guys do and how a product works its way through from conceptualizing right on through to the real world and applications and whatnot. So with all that stated, again, super excited for this conversation, and why don't we just launch right into it? I do have this first segment. This first segment lined up, something called Coloring Wikipedia. As my listeners know, it's a segment where I just read off a definition of what the guest does, or sometimes their industry. I do it for a couple of reasons. One, it brings everybody up to speed on what the profession sort of entails. But then also, too, I think it's interesting in the sense that sometimes we put our own stamp on the job itself. We might hold the same titles in different regions of the world, but yet the roles and responsibilities might be a little different. So anyway, I think it is pretty interesting to kind of examine it from that perspective. And I do have you down, obviously, as a mechanical designer. So let me just read that off for you, Rob. And maybe after you could share your thoughts. Does that sound all right?
Yep, sounds great.
All right, here we go. So mechanical designer. A mechanical designer or drafter is a design specialist who uses engineer specifications to create technical illustrations for machines. They also use computer aided design, CAD or CAD, programs to create detailed machine models. Mechanical designers work closely with engineers, other design specialists, and safety staff to ensure machine designs are functional, efficient, and safe. These design professionals usually adhere to mechanical engineer instructions to help create designs during the drafting process or further improve existing ones. Bit of a mouthful, a bit of a funny line at the end there. These design professionals usually adhere to mechanical engineer instructions. I thought that was funny, but I'll let you take it from here. What are your first takes on this definition?
Yeah, for sure. And there's so many different types of engineers, and even within mechanical engineering and design engineering, there's so many different avenues and types. So I think it's quite broad, which makes sense. I would say, there's manufacturing engineering, there's aerospace, there's biomed. Obviously, we're in consumer product, and each of those are going to be a little bit different. So I'm going to speak to basically consumer product, which is, I'm more specifically in kind of sports equipment and wearables and that kind of thing, but it's exactly the same as any other kind of consumer product. So I would say that what's interesting from that definition to me is that I think there's a lot more creativity in it than you kind of hear there. So it sounds very strict on the kind of drafting and drawing and mechanical specifications, and that's all part of it for sure. But I think it's really the bigger picture. I'd say it's problem solving. So it's kind of how do we make a better solution to whatever the need is out there than what exists. And if we're working on it, it means it hasn't been done before. We're always working on something new, something different. We're not just kind of copycat, just recreating what's already there, which inherently means there's a lot of creativity and innovation that needs to happen, which is a whole, long process. But I would say that the parts I would like to add to that definition are really kind of the brainstorming, the concepting throughout the process, then, getting over hurdles and coming up with solutions to kind of unique challenges that you come across.
Yeah,
So
definitely. I mean, that was something that struck me as a complete outsider as well. It did read as really, really technical. And with my limited knowledge of your field, even like I could sort of understand that there's probably a lot more than that. And to the points that you were just speaking of, problem solving, the creative elements, the creativity that's involved in this. And again, in welcoming your brother to the program, as an industrial designer, he does speak a lot about those points, and how his work pairs up with the work of you as far as blending these two worlds of some of these technical elements and bringing them to life and in such ways that are going to resonate with people, that are going to have impact as far as they're visually striking perhaps, but then also too, they're able to actually provide value to people. So I think it's really interesting in that sense. And it's another reason why I'm excited for this talk. But maybe we could actually slide into this other segment here, a day in the life. And I'd love to know a little bit more about, when you are involved in a product, what would be a typical flow for you during a day or maybe even a week for that matter?
yeah, I'll put it more in terms of a week, just because sometimes you're so focused one day on one thing and the next on the other. But I would say probably half my time is in CAD, so 3D CAD, basically a tool like any other tool to help you model, visualize, eventually produce 3D prints and renders and that kind of thing. So CAD is really the main tool. That's kind of where a lot of things happen. So at least half the time in that. So it is pretty software intensive. It is nice also to kind of get out of the CAD box and get into the real world a bit. We're making things that need to be used by people and need to be physically used, outside. So very much so we need a testing component. So there's after the CAD, we do 3D prints, then we have assembly and testing. There's, any range of testing, whether it's with athletes or professionals or normal consumers or focus groups, or there can be lab testing, durability testing, us kind of just doing our own homegrown experiments. So there's a huge testing component. With the prototypes, there's a lot of, again, the assembly and the hands-on side is something I really like. So again, imagine a workshop where you have a bunch of tools and you need to take these 3D prints and tap holes and, many different ways of finding clever ways to prototype things using what you've got. Sometimes it's 3D prints, sometimes it's, just kind of a collection of things you can find to get the job done. So I do enjoy the hands-on side of it. There's FEA, finite element analysis, which is kind of the more advanced engineering analysis. That's basically taking a CAD file and applying loads and applying real life forces to the CAD model. So you're basically predicting it before you actually make something. which we do sometimes depending on the project. Pretty powerful stuff. You have design reviews with clients. You have other calls with lots of people we collaborate with, the manufacturers, the electrical engineers, that kind of thing. You have some management and some kind of people side of it. You have the most fun part is the kind of sketching and concepting. So you have a notebook and it kind of can get a bit more creative again. It's a much smaller percent of the process, but my most favorite part.
It sounds like you're getting pulled in a lot of different directions there. But in speaking from an experience of having lots of guests on this show, this always seems to come up where like the more hats that they're wearing, the greater level of fulfillment and reward ultimately for it. Again, there can be moments of stress, I'm sure, in all of this, and you really want to. I'm guessing as a mechanical engineer, you really want to sink yourself into the product and keep improving it, but understanding that you do have to speak with this person, or you do have to interact with this individual at times, and that must be the moments of stress, but then also too, again, when you kind of like pull your head out of the sand and you look at the bigger picture, moments of reward as well, because it's like when it does finally amount to that product getting into the market and being received hopefully well, the reward's got to be there. Am I onto something there? Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. The some of the most stressful moments are when you have a professional athlete that you're working with, and the stakes are high, and you've put a lot of work in preparation for that. So they can be very stressful. But as you say, I mean that can be some of the most kind of fun, rewarding parts, as well as great learning experiences, ways to make the product better. I think the variety you mentioned is important as well. I think it's at least for my personality, it's nice to not just be in CAD 40 hours a week or just be on the road 40 hours a week. It's nice to do a little bit of the variety. And for me, mechanical engineering, I think is nice that it offers that. Even with the way that we set up Anamaly to basically be a consulting design firm, it's nice as far as the variety of projects go too. So from one day to another or one week to another, you can be working on very different types of products. And I think that variety kind of keeps the creativity, keeps the interest, as well as the learning going for us as well.
Really quickly, I'm sure this would vary. I'm sure it would vary product to product, but how long would it take from conceptualizing something, like sketching something out, and then finally getting it to a point where it would be ready for the market? Again, I know it's probably going to vary product to product, but roughly speaking, for somebody who would have no idea, like myself, and maybe for some listeners as well, what would you say to that?
Shockingly long. It's way longer than people think. I would say minimum 6 months if it's a very simple product and you're going as fast as possible. We would say probably about a year and a half is the most typical length. So even something like a trekking pole, it doesn't sound that intense.
Yeah.
Would still take minimum a year, likely a year and a half. We've had things up to about 3 years if it's more like an advanced project where it's super revolutionary and new materials and more difficult types of industries. So yeah, I would say 6 months to 3 years and very, very long, actually.
To be honest, I mean, that didn't surprise me all that much. I thought you were going to say something longer the way you're setting it up there. Okay. Follow-up question really quickly here too. I know we're kind of diving into it already, but as far as like this evolution of 3D printing, has that, helped cut that time down at all? Or is that just an added component to it all, but it hasn't really affected like timelines necessarily?
Yeah, for sure. It's helped. So things that sometimes would have taken a month to get a tool or a CNC part made, you can get in a few days, and the materials are getting better. So 3D printing absolutely helps that. What we end up finding is that I would say we just do more iteration. So sometimes things move quickly overall, but the entire process is so iterative that if we can do more iterations, it gets better every time. And so I'd say we just do more iteration than we used to as well. So a bit of both. Yeah.
All right. Well, why don't we slide into another segment here, something called pathways. And the aim of this segment here is to kind of illustrate that as professionals, oftentimes this journey that we're on and where we ultimately end up isn't this straight line. It isn't so linear. And I think it's inspirational, especially for young people to kind of hear this, that they don't necessarily have to worry about having everything lined up and knowing exactly what they're going to do before they end up in their dream job. And I say, finger quote that. So, off the top, I'd like to lightly introduce, what you do at Anamaly and that company itself being focused on athletic innovation, wearable technology. In the course of researching for this talk, I understand that you're a bit of a sportsman yourself, so I can see that connection there, with sports and whatnot. But as far as the engineering side goes, I'd love to know what kind of pulled you into that direction. And maybe we could hear a little bit more about your backstory as far as that goes.
Yeah, for sure. I'd say kind of two main things growing up, besides being into math and science. I was a bit on that side of the spectrum in school, but what really kind of got me into engineering, I would say, is I don't know if you've ever heard of a program called Odyssey of the Mind. It was something we
No.
had growing up that it was a creativity competition, essentially, a team of 7 people, and you were given a challenge at the beginning of the school year, and it was all outside of school. You were working on solutions to this that would then be presented at the end of the year. There were technical aspects, gadgets that needed to solve certain functions, and there were also theatrical and artistic elements that you were graded on. And that competition was we were really really into it. That was, I guess, my main thing growing up. Did it for about 8 years, and and just to note that now it's called Destination Imagination. So for anybody who's considering it, there's kind of 2 programs, but that's the main one now. And just to say that it really was, I mean, as far as the creativity, but also just like the creation, just kind of given this challenge, needing to solve it and in very hands-on ways. And, we didn't have any of the formal education at that time, but you were still able to figure things out and make things work. And it was something very fun and satisfying. And I think for me, for sure, that was probably, never mind the closest thing to what I do now, but it was also like very directly, I think, why I even knew engineering existed, and kind of throughout, middle school and high school was pretty clearly pointing me towards engineering. And the second factor, a bit smaller, would be that I had a wood shop growing up. And so I spent quite a bit of time in the workshop and just making things out of wood and lathes and bandsaws and, just like any kid playing around. But again, that was also very similar to a lot of the time I spend in the workshop now with prototypes. And I've always kind of loved that hands-on. So that was a bit similar as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I guess as you're kind of like going through these programs, then also, you know, understanding what you like and what you're just explaining as far as some of your activities in your youth, was there some sort of direction? Like somebody's like, well, maybe you should check out engineering, or was it something that you just sort of naturally discovered yourself would make sense for me? Why don't I go into that?
Yeah, I was a bit lucky that because I was already on the math and science side in school, I think teachers had already kind of mentioned engineering or mechanical. So I think I was a little bit luckier than some, that I probably had an idea earlier on. But then again, my coach on this Odyssey of the Mind program was also a bit of a mentor, and he was working as a product designer actually, and working in sports equipment and working in consumer products. So I think also very directly had a bit of influence from him. One other, I guess, turning point I would say, as far as the sports side of things, I just thought I was going to go into engineering, and okay, I went to BU, studied engineering. And then it wasn't until I was graduating, I was pretty close to graduation, that I walked in one day, there was a posting for a job in the golf industry, and it just sounded more interesting than aerospace. So I ended up with a job offer for aerospace and a job offer for golf.
Wow.
And golf sounded more fun and more, something I'm more into. So I kind of chose that path. And not to make too long of a story of it, I only after working there a couple of years in the golf industry did I kind of connect the dots that I was skiing every weekend, and I had been growing up, and I had been during engineering school. I didn't realize that engineers actually worked on things like skis and
Yeah.
all this equipment I was using. And so then after working in the golf industry a few years, I was able to transition to the ski industry and outdoor. And that was for me when my passions really kind of combined, of the things I love doing and then the things I got to do for work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I mean, there's moments in there, I think, along the way where there's some conscious thought that's going towards it, and kind of like obviously as well as some, being fortunate to have people in your life that are kind of guiding you towards it. And it's this combination of the two, I guess, that can amount to success when you really sort of like get this sort of broad idea of where you'd like to end up, and then begin just going after it. So yeah, I really like that story. Well, with that in mind, maybe we could slide on to this new segment here, a Q&A discovery. We can kind of just continue this back and forth. And I was thinking here we could return back to the job itself, as far as, giving listeners a better idea of what it's all about from a process standpoint. And I was thinking it might be fun to kind of hear, some of the steps, at least broadly speaking, of when you are conceptualizing an idea in the beginning, right on through to it being put out into the world. And maybe to add a little bit of complexity here to it, again, mentioning your brother here and this notion of industrial design. Curious to hear about how somebody like yourself would be interacting with him, or somebody who's holding that role, and how the two of you might be interacting at different points along that journey.
yeah, for sure. And so Ray and I obviously were in daily contact in every project we're working together on. So that's obviously nice when you can do that with your brother as well. But I would say that's the typical combination in any consumer product company. I've been in-house at a few, and then obviously worked with many from the outside. And it's always that combination of the mechanical engineering plus the product design or industrial design. So for many years, I was working with other industrial designers at my couple of in-house jobs, and Ray was working with engineers at his job at Puma. And so it was nice when we could finally just work together instead. So we got a little bit lucky in that way as well. I'll get to the process in a minute. One other part of the backstory I would say is that I think there's also somewhat less of a coincidence that we ended up there, because growing up together, we were always kind of talking about these things. We were always influenced by each other. I would visit him at college when he was in art school and design school and hang out with his friends there. And then he would bring me to galleries. And so I think he opened my mind to the more creative side of things, the more artistic side, probably more so than I would have on my own, engineering style. And then also, obviously, I kind of did the same for him with engineering. He always kind of saw a little bit the technical side through me. So I think we had that nice kind of influence on each other, let's say, for many years before we started working together. As far as the process goes, the process starts very much on his side. So it starts much more creatively and conceptually. So it's really on the design side first, where you're kind of trying to open your mind, lateral thinking, coming up with new solutions, and kind of no solution is a bad one. You're not judging things yet. You're not, analyzing them yet. So you need to kind of start open-minded. I'm involved in some of that, but it's more on his side. And then we start to transition to my side. So then it's a bit more, okay, now we have our lots of ideas. Let's take our favorites and analyze them and see which would be the best for the application, and, look at whether it's cost or durability or materials or manufacturing or whatever the concerns are. And so then we kind of work together to narrow down the list to our final one, also working with the client if it's a client project. And then it's a bit more in my camp after that, but at the same time, he's always involved. So we never just throw it over the wall.
Yeah.
I think we find the key is that we want to get both of our input, my input earlier on, his input later on. And then when we even get to manufacturing, we bring in the contract manufacturer. They have another set of kind of concerns or things we need to solve. And then all three of us are in the conversation. So as long as we're all in the conversation, we have a nice balance of finding what technically works, as well as not losing the vision from the design side. And for a consumer product, you really need both. If you're missing one of those two, then it won't sell. It won't be a success.
Yeah. And that again, I guess in hearing it from you right now, and then also speaking with your brother, I think like that would probably be part of your secret sauce, essentially, right? I mean, in terms of what's helped propel your company, because oftentimes, at least the way it was explained to me, is that if there is a gap in that communication in between, like that's where products fail. Like that is the difference maker right there. And it's oftentimes in these bigger companies, there is that gap, or some critical piece of information isn't relayed, or it's not communicated in the right way necessarily. And again, that can make all the difference. Whereas with you guys, I mean, one, being brothers, knowing each other fairly intimately in that sense, but then also two, how each other work and being exposed to one another's worlds and respecting that, I'm sure that definitely amounts to a lot of the success that you've had. Maybe you could speak to that point as well. Just once more, we could kind of revisit that. Does that make sense? Is that?
Absolutely. And I would say respect is a good word for it. Just having an appreciation of each other's worlds, where, again, a lot of people that maybe I went to school with, if you aren't exposed to that and you work on machines, there's a lot of engineers who work on machines, and that's great. It's a mechanical thing that you just need to make the best mechanical thing. But in our world with consumer products, there's so many human factors. And so having appreciation for kind of the emotional side of it, the human side of it, which I get from him, is kind of necessary in consumer product.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. That's kind of what stood out when you were just telling me that. I had this vision, the stereotype in my mind of somebody, within engineering who doesn't necessarily expose themselves to these types of ways of thinking, or, visions of the world and whatnot. And then vice versa as well. Maybe somebody, a designer who's not really stepping into the world of mechanical engineering or fully understanding the challenges that might exist there. But when you do, again, sort of not only respect it, but dive into it and try to expose yourself to these ideas and fully, take it all in as best you can, that's where the magic occurs. So yeah, it would seem that you guys have something special going on there as far as that goes. Maybe we could slide in this other question here. I do have, this question as far as, again, the relationship with you and your brother. I keep bringing this up, but I think it's really interesting. It's an interesting dynamic to all of this. And again, the success that you've had together, maybe you could share with listeners some of the products that you have come up with that have been put into the market to kind of add even more clarity to the work that you guys do.
Yeah, for sure. We've been lucky enough to work with people like Tiger Woods and Vijay Singh and Usain Bolt. And, that's where being part of a brand or working with a brand that has those relationships, you get to kind of, it does kind of springboard you to a different level of people you have access to that we would have on our own. But that's been never mind interesting and pretty unique, but again, learning from the best and kind of having chances to test these products with the best people and kind of see how they approach that has been great. So that's kind of one side of it. On some of the specific products themselves, the Vapor climbing helmet, which was a Black Diamond product, never mind the sales numbers kind of go with it, but it was really nice to make something for an industry of rock climbing where people didn't typically wear helmets, or let's say a lot of people didn't wear helmets because they were heavy and bulky and annoying. And so we basically set out to make one that was lighter and more comfortable and people would actually wear. And there's a lot of rock climbers who actually wore that helmet who didn't previously wear a helmet at all.
That sounds crazy to me. Sorry to interrupt there. That they weren't wearing helmets and doing rock climbing. But anyway,
totally. Totally. Personality or just, part of the sport. It wasn't really as common. And the same thing with skiing 20, 30 years ago, where a lot of people didn't wear helmets. And as the design got cooler, instead of a motorcycle helmet, they were something designed for skiing. As they got lighter weight and better materials and more comfortable and warmer, all those things, then the adoption curve went up. So it was interesting with climbing. That was our same goal, was to try to make the adoption go up just for people's safety. So that was, never mind, successful on the number of units sold and all that, but it was really fulfilling on that one. Another one, Z-Pole, a Black Diamond product, which, trekking poles don't sound that interesting, but it was a very revolutionary way to make a trekking pole. And it's fun when something starts as it was only going to sell 7,000 in a very niche market, and it ended up exploding to be, half of their product line and sell, I don't know, 3, 4, 500,000 per year. One of those kind of examples of things that, when you work on these things, that's quite fulfilling just to see. Of course. You see it on the trails everywhere you go. You see these things being used, and it's kind of fun to be in different countries of the world and kind of seeing your things used around the world. And we had, just recently, this past Olympics, there was a shoe that was used to win the 200 meter gold medal. So that obviously that kind of stuff is really exciting. There's a startup sound burner we've worked with, wearables for musicians, a bit more of a niche kind of a product, but same thing. They've sold over 100,000 units. And for a startup to do that without having the kind of brand backing, it's just fun to be part of those kind of projects.
No doubt. I mean, the level of fulfillment that you'd be getting from that, and outside of some of the awards, I'm sure, that come with these. I mean, again, as I led off the show, introduced some of the awards: Backpacker Magazine, Outside Magazine, Red Dot Design Award, like Popular Science. These are big ones. Like, they're no joke. It strikes me as like an accomplishment for anyone to get a product into the market. The first thing, right? That's the first step. Like, that must be a gauntlet just for that to occur. And then not only that, but to see it have success, to see all these units being sold, and then the recognition that comes within the industry, having public figures utilizing the products. Yeah, I mean, the level of fulfillment must certainly be there, 100%. As far as all of that goes, though, and again, returning to your focus mainly being on wearable technologies and the mechanical engineering design perspective, it must be a challenge, though, also. You're like, some of these athletes, let's return to that point. Some of the athletes, like, the demands that they must have of the product must be a bit of a difficult sort of layer to add on to all that you're doing. You'd speak to that. It would be, I think, interesting for listeners to hear.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess a couple comments. One would be, there's a kind of a famous quote from Johnny Ives, which was, I think, is very appropriate. And they asked him, what are you surprised about after doing this for 20 years at Apple, head designer at Apple? And he said at the time, what surprises him was that it's still that hard every time. You think, okay, if they're the best in the world at doing it, and they've done it for 20 years in a row, you'd think when they went to make the next iPhone, next this, next that, it would be easy. And the point is, anytime you're doing anything new, which is every project, it's surprisingly hard. There's always a new challenge, always, hurdles and things to figure out. So I guess that's kind of one comment. I'll also say, especially with kind of athletic equipment and wearable technology, the challenge there is there's just so many requirements. So you can imagine the durability and the typical kind of mechanical requirements, materials and strength, and that's all there. But then you also have the human body. There's nothing flat on the human body. So now you have to have stuff that's comfortable, different parts of the body, which, introduces a whole set of ergonomic concerns. And, you have like the look, people, again, the emotional side, the human side, you have, aesthetics and color and, everything on that is quite important to people, and whether they'll actually buy it or not. Of course, performance. Then you get into things like, even branding and marketing and distribution. And there's just so many things that go into it and have to come together to make it successful. So like you say, just to get it off the ground, just to launch it, a lot of things have to go well. And then, to kind of into the award level, everything has to kind of come together just right.
Yeah, I love that. Again, like that sense of fulfillment must just be off the charts. When you take a step back and you're looking at this whole thing, this whole process, the journey you've been on, the journey of one particular product from just an idea all the way through, and then seeing where it evolves to must be it must run deep, that sense of fulfillment. All right, well, let's go into this water cooler story segment here. And here I just ask guests to indulge listeners with a story related to their work. And I'm really eager to hear what you have for us today, Rob.
A couple things come to mind here. I would say one, and I referenced the climbing helmet earlier. I would say probably a few of the most touching moments, especially one of them in my career, was when we worked on that Vapor helmet and we got a helmet back that had been through a really nasty fall, and this really long letter about how it saved his life. And the guy was very touched and thankful. And it was really interesting to have that personal connection at the end, years after you made something, and then to have a face and a name kind of go along with not just a number of units sold or something, but his words of what he was saying about wearing it and how it saved his life. And you can imagine that's pretty touching. And then seeing the thing in a pile of pieces at the end, but it worked, just like the testing said it would. So it's we've had a number of those. I think especially with helmets has been kind of some of the more touching stories for me. So I guess that's kind of one side of the maybe water cooler story. Another kind of just more funny, kind of just little part of engineering you don't think about. And again, for people thinking about going into engineering or into sports engineering or consumer product, there was a funny moment. I was only a few years out of college, and we were working with Vijay Singh. And at that time, he was #1 golfer in the world. He had just passed Tiger Woods. So, it was a big deal to be working with him for a few days on the driving range. And there were a couple of us engineers. Our job for the day, for the few days, was to stand in the field and mark where his balls landed. So he was trying different drivers that we had designed, and he's hitting drives at us. We're standing out in the field with a bunch of cones and trying to see the balls come down and avoid, getting hit.
Not
getting
knocked out.
Yeah, exactly. By the #1 golfer in the world. And then mark where the ball landed. And then we could record a bunch of data about dispersion and distance and kind of see which club outperformed the other. And this was before some of the launch monitors they have now, right. But it was pretty funny to get balls driven at you by the #1 golfer in the world.
Yeah. That's a fun one. That added some variety to your day, I would say.
Yeah, and it was scientific. We were still measuring and marking the spots and getting some data from it. So
yeah, that's a fun one. No, I like both those stories there because they illustrate two different sort of takes, two different sort of impacts that the work can have on somebody, like the experiences that you're putting yourself into or being exposed to, but then also too, the impact that the product design can have on the world. And again, returning that sense of fulfillment in the work that you do. So yeah, thanks for sharing those. I really like both of them. We are flying through this talk here, Rob. We're heading around the bend into this last segment, a crystal ball segment. As the name implies, we're looking towards the future, trends, predictions, so on and so forth. And I do understand that outside of the work that you do for clients, that you and your brother are working on something a little bit more personal, your own sort of product, which is this cycling shoe, a 3D printed custom carbon cycling shoe. And the startup is called Lore. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about this. The website, checking this out, provocatively states the Lore One, the name of this launch product, is being the world's fastest cycling shoe. So I'm really eager to hear more about this.
It's interesting, as you say, this is the first time we've been part of a startup. So as opposed to just having client work and doing just our piece of the process and then kind of stepping out, it's nice to kind of be part of the founding team and like you say, have a bit more skin in the game. And we kind of always thought we might do this where we would basically, for a number of years, work with startups and basically from the outside, just kind of learn what we can and kind of see that whole startup ecosystem and process. And then eventually, once we felt strongly about something, to try to partake. So we did that for about 10 years working with startups. And now it's fun to kind of try our hand, as well as a couple of the other founders who kind of bring the business side and sales and marketing, kind of the other parts of the process as well. So yeah, it's been fun to work on. As far as the technology goes, it's exciting as well. Like we always prefer to work on revolutionary, real game-changing, truly different things. And this is absolutely that, which is kind of why one of the reasons we were so excited about it. Brand new 3D printing materials and processes that allow custom hard shell footwear that can then make the performance much higher. So yeah, we're seeing performance gains 10 to 20%
Wow.
over typical shoes.
Wow.
And that's pretty unheard of
Yeah.
in sports to get anything above single digits. So we know that the performance and the technology is there. So never mind, is it really exciting on this application? And we have obviously a bunch of ideas of where it can go from here. But for personally, it's also exciting because 3D printing and additive manufacturing is really one of the waves of the future. So obviously there's other things as well, AI and different things, but in product, in physical product, which is kind of what we work in, that's one of the most exciting things happening in this space. And people have been talking about it for a long time. And finally, I would say the materials are finally ready. They're strong enough. The costs have come down enough that it's only in high-end product, but it's still ready for actual production using 3D prints instead of just prototyping. So from our side, it's been really exciting to delve into that world and just basically learn everything there is to learn about 3D printing. And, we had to basically become experts in additive manufacturing for this project. So not only is it good for the product and the company, but personally, I think, we're happy to expand our tool set and kind of our experience and knowledge. And again, it's just a field that's going to keep growing. So it's been fun to be kind of getting deeper into that world.
Yeah. A couple of things that struck me there. One, I'd like to return to that point of you guys working with startups, at least initially, and helping them, along their journey and launching products and whatnot. And was that something, I just want to make sure I had this right? Like, you guys had this vision that eventually you want to create your own product. So strategically working with these startups for 5-10 years or so, you would, by way of just the involvement in these projects, would be learning about how to do this for yourselves one day. Was that, did I hear that correctly? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of things where it wasn't the direct or the only kind of motivation, but
Yeah.
we definitely talked about that
Yeah.
10
Yeah.
years
Yeah.
ago as kind of one of the strategies, one of the
Nice.
ideas. Yeah, the startup world is a whole nother animal. So it's kind of nice to, see it from the outside as we're kind of watching other founders, what they do well, what they do
Yeah.
poorly, the right decisions, wrong decisions. I guess another thing I would say is that it's also it's obviously very risky, right? It's the most risky kind of a business venture. So there's always this trade-off between, if you're part of a startup, you may have a payday someday, but you may not get a salary for years. And it's hard to have a family or, support your cost of living on that. So we also kind of wanted to create a situation where the client work and the contract work would basically pay the bills. And then we could kind of have not only learn about startups, but then eventually put up one foot into the startup
Yeah.
world so that we kind of, are in the business world and we have a bit of an investment and, something exciting there, but find that balance where we're not 100%
Yeah.
into some maybe someday thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
can kind of keep the lights on as we go.
Yeah, how clever. Yeah, I really like that. And I think it's inspirational as well for listeners who are, might have that leaning or that slant or like that thought of, well, maybe one day this is an area I'd like to go, from mechanical design engineering into something like that. So it's a nice sort of strategic approach to it all. And then the second thing here, as far as, this experience of working with this product, your own product, it must be a bit of a freeing one to a certain extent. I mean, like, obviously with Anomaly, you have your clients and you're serving their needs and what they're after and what they want. But now it's just on you guys. I mean, you're free to go wherever you want with this. I mean, that must be add a whole different sort of wrinkle to it all, I guess is what I'm getting at there.
Yeah, for sure. And we love the founding team. There's a few others as well, in addition to Ray and I. So it's nice to be kind of on the same page, and we are all making the decisions together. So it's nice to be part of that guiding team instead of just receiving direction or
Yeah.
decisions from, like you say, an external party. So I think it is freeing, but it also depends who you're working with. And we're lucky that we definitely, that was part of the reason to join as well, is that we definitely see eye to eye and kind of are all striving for the same thing. So that's been fun. And then, it's a bit different as well to kind of be growing a team. And, we step into the management role a little bit where we do have more people that are working for us. And so to be kind of, let's call it the director level, where you're, able to do more things with the help of some others. And that's kind of been a fun aspect to it as well.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. All right. Well, we've just blasted through this conversation. I can't believe we're nearing the end of it here. But Rob, I mean, I've really enjoyed it, and I think we've painted this really nice picture for people that might be interested in this field, want to know more about it. And yeah, I can't thank you enough for all your time and insights.
It's fun to talk about. I always enjoy talking about these things.
Well, for those interested in learning more about Rob and his work or his company, Anomaly, you can check him out on LinkedIn. You can also visit the website Anomaly, ANAMALY.com. You can also find them on Instagram, and the startup that we mentioned, we spoke about Lore, the cycling shoe. Lore.cc is where you can find them. And for reference, all this information will be included in the show notes. If you like today's show, please be sure to share. Tell a friend, tell 3 friends, tell 5 friends. Get the message out. I really, really would appreciate that. You can also rate, review, and subscribe wherever you access your podcast. And then finally, don't forget to head on over to YouTube. In the last year, I did launch a channel over there. You'll be able to take in the conversation, the video conversation, and I will have some imagery attached to the actual talk. So if you do go over there, you'll notice, the program needs a bit of love on that platform. So hit that subscribe button. It would really, really mean a lot. And then finally, don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life as where we'll continue to explore and unearth the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm your host, Christopher Schoenwald. Until next time, stay curious about life and living.